really fun flute. Hey there, and welcome back. In today's episode, I wanted to cover a couple of tips for playing the drone flute. So these are known as Native American drone flutes, double flutes, harmony flutes. They go by a lot of different names, and there's lots of different drone flutes or double flutes in our community and in our industry. So today I wanted to cover the basis on 4 tips for you to consider when you're playing the drone flute. So we're going to talk about our lips and our mouth. We're also going to talk about our hands. Also going to talk about jewelry. This is an important one, which we'll get to. And then a drone flute that has 1 or 2 blocks on it, or 3, depending if you have a triple flute or not. So let's dive in, and we're going to start with what do we do with our lips. What I hear a lot with flute playing, and one of the complaints that I hear from students and other musicians who play these instruments, is air leaks around the mouth hole. On a single flute, we know that if we get a good closure, we're not leaking any air, and you may hear a little hiss or something if that happens. On a drone flute, it's a little different. We have this bigger mouthpiece, and it depends on, the way flute makers are making these, it really depends on the flute maker. Some make them a little bit more pronounced or recessed. Others kind of put them close together, and it can make it a little bit more difficult to play. So one of the things that I do when I play a drone flute is I will move the flute over, especially if I want to play just one, like a single flute, or I want to play this side and not this side. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the corner of my mouth in between that space between the 2 holes here. And so that allows me, I'll move the flute a little bit. And the one thing that you need to practice with this, 2 things. One, yes, using the corner of your mouth, but you may want to push the flute into your lips a little bit more. And that's going to help get that secure closure around the flute. I'm not saying put the whole flute mouthpiece into your mouth. What I'm saying is by pushing it into your lips a little bit, it can help you close around the hole so you don't get that air leak. One of the things that we hear with drone flutes that we don't on a single flute is the air leaking over into the other hole here. And so you might get a hiss, a whistle, some sort of chatter there in the flute. Now I'm exaggerating that a little bit, but you may hear that when you play the drone flute. So be sure, experiment with your posture a little bit, where you may tilt your head a little bit more, but definitely pursing your lips and pushing the flute into your lips a little bit more will certainly help. The next thing that I want to cover is which hand plays on top, which on bottom. You probably already have a preference built around which hand you prefer and feels more comfortable playing on the bottom part of the flute rather than the top. Typically, the rule of thumb is your dominant hand goes on the bottom. So if you're a right-handed person, you would play with the right hand on the bottom. Whereas if you're a left-handed person, your left hand would go on bottom. But I see it all kinds of ways. I see right-handed people playing with left hand on bottom, and so forth and so on. But the thing to consider here is when you're reaching over another barrel, when you're reaching over another part of the flute to get there, it can sometimes be like this one, might be a little bit more of a challenge here. And I know it can feel funny to play with your other hand on the bottom of the flute, but guys, it's a really good exercise for you to break a bit of a habit playing. We have these little things that we do with our fingers, and they come across in our music as little runs or little motifs that we commonly do. So by switching hands, we can kind of get a new perspective on some things. And also it can alleviate having to reach over such a big part of the flute here. I know we now have to reach over on the top part here if I switch my hands, but now I don't have to reach over those plugs on this particular flute, which can cause a little bit of crowding and things like that. So consider which hand you're going to play on bottom. And you may go beyond your preference when you play a drone flute. I'll demonstrate for this one, just so you get a sound of the flute too. This is a B flute made by Dana Ross of Falcon Flutes. See, I've got to curve up my hand a little bit to kind of get out of the way. I can't play like I normally would play, kind of flat with that. So now I'll use the other hand. And I won't get into the plugs or the third or the fourth or the fifth harmony on flutes like this. We do that inside of a course, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. So moving on, when we get to, I know you guys love the sounds, and I love the sounds of these big monster drone flutes. Oh my gosh, they sound so beautiful. But there's a lot to consider when you go to a bass drone flute. It's a lot of flute. It's a lot of flute to contend with. It gets a little easier with the mouth hole here. These are kind of close together, but there's plenty of room to work with based on the first tip that I gave you. So if you want to single out and just play that melody side of the flute, you can. If you want to bring in the drone, it's not too big to where you can't do that. This does start to feel like a mouthful, and when we get to triple flutes, we see more of that. How do you segregate the airflow? So it's kind of like singling out a note on a harmonica. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that, but it can be kind of tricky. But the thing I wanted to address with these big drone flutes is if you're wearing any jewelry on your hands when you play these, it can sometimes get in the way, especially for those of you who are doing videos or recordings, whether it's for social media, YouTube, or if it's for the studio recording. Consider what jewelry you have on. This goes for anything, like even if you're wearing bracelets and you're using a condenser microphone, some of those little chatters can come up in the playing. But what I've found is with a flute like this, so this is a low F sharp drone, low B Aeolian tuned flute here made by Brad Young of Four Wind Flutes. And when I reach across that top hand over here, I'm reaching across that big barrel, and guess what? That ring finger, if I'm not careful, when I play this, I'll hear that clicking. So when I play this, I like to play this flute specifically in a lot of like meditation and yoga environments, and that's not a sound you want in there with that pretty music. So oftentimes, as when I play my drums or my Rav Vast, I'll remove my jewelry from my hands, and that just keeps you from clicking on the flute. So here's how this flute sounds. I'll give you a little demo. Very beautiful sound. Okay, moving on. Something else. Now, the fourth tip that I want to share with you is a little bit more of the design of the flute, but something that you might consider when you're buying a flute. In the course that I'm going to tell you about later, we go through lots of different tips, all of the things to consider when buying a drone flute. And one of the things that I love to consider is the blocks. The blocks on the flute, the totem, the bird, the block, they're all called the same thing, or they mean the same thing, and that's this right here. So the benefit to having two blocks on the flute as opposed to just one giant block like this is that you get more fine tuning. So you can adjust the flute, you can adjust how it jumps in the octave or how it doesn't jump with the octave. So a lot of times when you overblow a flute, that's jumping into the neck, that's jumping the octave. So you jump to the octave from the root. We have that in our drone flutes, especially those that are like this, where you're playing on the root on that drone side. I know this one has extra plugs here, but that's something to consider. You get more fine tuning, meaning you can adjust the block forward or back. So forward meaning towards the foot of the flute, or back towards you when you're playing. Just keep in mind that when you move this block, you do affect the flute's pitch. And so you want to be careful not to adjust too much. And not only will you adjust pitch, but you'll adjust the voicing of the flute. Sliding the block back towards you will result in more of an airy sound, a little bit more raspy, a little bit more airy. The benefit to that is that fundamental note on your flute, all holes closed, the root, now becomes stronger and it's less sensitive. It's less likely to jump all of a sudden. Now, when you slide it forward, so towards the end of the flute, what happens is the flute can start to sound a little more frail and thin and nasally, but it can also make that octave note jump a lot easier. So if you've got a stubborn flute that doesn't want to jump and hit that octave note on the drone side, you might consider sliding it forward towards the foot of the flute. Now when you have a block like this, it can get a little bit more challenging to do some of that fine tuning, and what you end up doing is you end up twisting. I'm going to be a little bit more elaborate there than I should be. So you'll end up twisting the block a little bit to slide one end, kind of cover up more of that hole, while the other one kind of stays put. Even more challenging for a flute like this that has the chimneys on the block itself. So consider those things when you're playing a drone flute, or even when you're buying a drone flute. I know there's a lot that goes into making these. A lot more goes into playing these. And if you're interested in learning how to play the regular drone flute, the over-under, the harmony drone flute, the three-hole harmony drone flute, the Mayan harmony drone flute, any of these, the alternating drone flute, I just put together a course that goes through so much of this, hours and hours of content, 82-page guide to help you along the way too, that you get access to inside the course. If you're interested in any of that, look in for a link in the description below, and it'll take you over there so you can learn more about that course. I love playing drone flutes. They've been a big part of my musical career. They've been a big part of my creativity. And what I find is a lot of students buy a drone flute, they hear me or someone else playing one on YouTube, contact the flute maker, buy it, they get it, and you don't really know what to do with it or how to get the most out of it. So that's why I put together a course on this, was to help you get more, understand more, appreciate more, and just be able to play your drone flute with new magic inside. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share in this. If you have any questions about drone flutes, if you have ideas about drone flutes, anything drone or double flute related, feel free to drop a comment below. We'll come through, we'll take a look at those, and we'll go from there. It's been really fun to share these things with you, and I hope to see you in another video soon. If there's anything I can do to help you grow as a flute player, reach out. I'm here, and I'm happy to help. See you next time.